Let's talk about wood, the backbone of the American dream. For years, Canadian lumber quietly supported U.S. construction, but then, Washington decided to shake things up with tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. The aim? Protect U.S. lumber producers from what was seen as unfair competition. The result? A hefty tariff that made Canadian lumber more expensive. This wasn't the first lumber dispute between the U.S. and Canada, but it was part of a broader, more aggressive trade strategy. The tariffs sent shockwaves through the supply chain, making construction materials pricier. Builders faced chaos as project costs soared overnight. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a direct hit to an industry already dealing with tight margins. The stage was set for a showdown, and the first casualty was the stable cost of building a home in America. The dream was getting more expensive before the first nail was even hammered. The tariffs were a classic case of unintended consequences, impacting the very industry they aimed to protect. The predictable cost of building a home was now a thing of the past. The American dream was becoming more elusive, with tariffs adding to the cost of construction. The policy decision made hundreds of miles away was now a direct hit to the bottom line. The dream of homeownership was slipping further out of reach. Canada wasn't going to take the tariffs lying down. Ontario, a major lumber player, decided to respond strategically. Instead of complaints, Ontario restricted raw log exports to the U.S. This move hit American mills hard, cutting off their raw material supply. The irony? The tariffs meant to protect U.S. mills now threatened their operations. Ontario's move exposed a flaw in the protectionist argument. The U.S. tariffs overlooked the integrated nature of the forest products industry. Ontario's message was clear: trade is a two-way street. The province wasn't just a supplier, it was a crucial partner in North American manufacturing. By restricting raw logs, Ontario defended its interests and highlighted economic interdependencies. The U.S. had started a trade war over wood, and Ontario fired back, targeting the American supply chain. This was getting complicated and expensive. The move demonstrated Ontario's powerful position in the trade relationship. The province showed it held significant cards in the trade game. The tariffs had unintended consequences, impacting the very mills they aimed to protect. Ontario's strategic response was a masterstroke in trade negotiations. The trade war over wood was escalating, with both sides feeling the impact. The economic interdependencies were too deep to ignore. The trade relationship was more complex than a simple tariff could address. Why all the fuss over Canadian wood? Can't America use its own trees? The U.S. has forests, but the dependency on Canadian lumber is deep-rooted. Canada is the world's second-largest softwood producer, and the U.S. is its biggest customer. Canadian lumber, especially spruce pine fir, is ideal for residential framing. American forests produce southern yellow pine, which isn't as suitable for framing. The U.S. domestic lumber industry can't meet the country's demand. Even at full capacity, U.S. mills can't produce enough lumber for all the homes needed. The tariffs disrupted this finely tuned system, creating a supply shock. Builders faced a choice: pay more for Canadian wood or find scarce domestic alternatives. The construction process relies on specific lumber types, making material switches costly. The tariffs misunderstood the complexity of the lumber market. The U.S. imports Canadian lumber not just because it's cheap, but because it's necessary. The tariffs didn't create more American sawmills or change tree species. They just made a necessary product more expensive, hurting the home construction industry. The policy punished the very industry it was supposed to protect. When lumber prices skyrocket, everything gets more expensive. The tariffs acted as a direct tax on home building, adding thousands to home prices. This wasn't just theory, it was a real cost passed to homebuyers. The dream of homeownership was pushed further out of reach. The U.S. was already in a housing shortage, and tariffs made it worse. Builders delayed or canceled projects, exacerbating the shortage. The construction industry, a massive economic engine, slowed down. The tariffs threatened more jobs than they protected. The cost of protecting a small part of the economy was paid by everyone else. Higher construction costs meant higher home prices and rents. More people were priced out of the market, delaying life plans. The policy, wrapped in economic patriotism, hurt the families it aimed to help. It was a self-inflicted wound that worsened the housing crisis. The tariffs didn't solve the lumber market issues, they created new problems. The burden fell on American families, especially first-time homebuyers. The policy's impact was a financial blow to those it was supposed to help. The American housing crisis was made worse by a trade dispute over wood. With Canadian lumber prices high, builders sought alternatives. Domestically produced wood like southern yellow pine wasn't a perfect substitute. Ramping up domestic production takes years, not an overnight fix. Builders considered other materials like light-gauge steel framing. Steel is strong, light, and fire-resistant, but switching isn't simple. It requires different skills, tools, and construction techniques. Retraining carpenters and subcontractors is costly and time-consuming. The transition to steel framing is expensive and complex. Building codes and inspection processes differ for steel-framed homes. The dream of a quick switch to steel crashed into industry realities. The lumber tariffs didn't make switching materials easy. The construction industry faced inertia in changing long-standing practices. The search for alternatives highlighted the complexity of the building process. The tariffs didn't just raise prices, they complicated material choices. The industry struggled with the reality of finding viable substitutes. The lumber price shock revealed the challenges of changing construction norms. Ontario's log export restriction was a strategic pivot. The province aimed to move up the value chain, not just supply raw resources. The new strategy focused on manufacturing higher-value wood products. Ontario encouraged investment in facilities for sophisticated products. These products command higher prices and aren't covered by tariffs. By transforming wood before export, Ontario sidestepped trade barriers. This shift encouraged innovation in Ontario's forestry sector. Companies invested in new technologies and retooled plants. The government supported the transition with incentives. Ontario's pivot had long-term implications for the industry. The province aimed to lead in sustainable building systems. The U.S. could become dependent on Canadian innovation for advanced components. Ontario's response wasn't just survival, it was transformation. The trade threat became a catalyst for industrial evolution. The province positioned itself as a leader in construction technology. The strategic pivot turned a trade challenge into an opportunity. The lumber dispute was part of a larger trade conflict. The U.S. imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum, affecting construction. The rationale was national security, met with skepticism. The escalation compounded the construction industry's challenges. Steel and aluminum prices climbed, adding to builders' woes. These metals are critical in construction, from beams to window frames. The tariffs created a perfect storm for home builders. Project budgets were devastated by rising material costs. Contractors struggled to provide accurate quotes amid price volatility. The uncertainty froze investment and planning. The dream of cheap alternatives to wood was dashed. The trade war complicated potential resolutions. The lumber dispute was entangled with steel and aluminum issues. Canada faced tariffs on multiple fronts, complicating negotiations. The conflict spiraled, straining diplomatic relations. The trade war's impact was felt across industries, with home builders caught in the middle. Border communities felt the trade war's impact acutely. These towns rely on the free flow of goods and people. Their prosperity is linked to the cross-border region. Tariffs and retaliatory measures disrupted integrated economies. Ontario's log export restriction hit American mills hard. Mills faced shutdowns due to a lack of raw materials. The policy put American workers at risk, not from competition, but tariffs. The economic logic turned on itself, creating absurd outcomes. The service economy of border towns suffered. Trucking companies and customs brokers faced challenges. Retail stores saw fewer cross-border customers. The sense of community was replaced by economic division. The tariffs didn't solve lumber market issues, they created new problems. The housing crisis worsened, and construction costs soared. The tariffs were a cautionary tale of simplistic trade policies. In a global economy, trade wars with neighbors can backfire.